Um, Good morning, everybody. How are we today? Good? Okay. Did anybody not get a handout? Okay. Can we pair up with a friend? Because when I was supposed to go on at 9:30 a.m., I didn't want to use too much paper because I anticipated people trickling in this Saturday morning, and we switched order. So now there are far more people than we projected. Sorry about that. So Danielle's introduction was a little misleading. I am a lawyer. I did do those things, but I'm not here to talk to you about the law. I spend a lot of time in my current position helping people achieve their dreams. I'm corporate counsel, well, I'm the only person in the legal department for a California sustainable cannabis company called Flocana. And our founder founded the company with a view of changing the paradigm on large-scale agriculture to really give the value back to the small farmers of the Emerald Triangle. And as a lawyer, I approach certain questions and certain decisions with the lens of my training. But when you're presented with a new, so to speak, industry, it totally turns on its head everything that you learned in law school. So daily, I am challenged to think about what my assumptions are and what is possible, and not just what is probable. So I thought, given the visionary nature of this morning and this weekend, it would be good to engage in something that's less lecture-based and more interactive between the people who are here. So again, I like to use frameworks. I'm a very logical person. And so I thought, you can dream, but unless you put it down on paper and you go back and goal set and reflect upon it, how do you know that you've achieved it? Because until someone like Danielle repeats back at me the things that I've been able to do in my very short legal career, I don't really think about it. I think about the fact that I forgot to pick up my laundry, or my dog hasn't had enough time and attention from me. And unless I start with realistic goal setting and go back and see that I've done that thing, you may forget, because life goes by very quickly. And I feel like in this day and age, we don't spend enough time pausing, interacting, and reflecting on what it is that we want to accomplish as a collective and how we want to get there. So this morning, I'm not suggesting that this is the only way to approach your own decision making. I'm not saying these are perfect models, and I'm not even saying that these are good models. But when I've encountered them, it's given me pause, and it's given me something to think about, and it's given me a new way of thinking. And if that does that same thing for you today, I think we'll have accomplished something. And if you've decided this is terrible, I'm absolutely open to hearing why, because we need to know what's working and what's not working, and I like to learn from other people's experience. So a few basic goals for today. So my main goal, as I said, is for people to leave here with some framework of how they want to accomplish their large and small tasks. We're supposed to envision a future and a reality for ourselves, but unless we know how we want to at least proceed in the next step, we can get stuck. And I know I have that problem for myself personally. I have a lot that I want to try and accomplish, and when I look back at a year, there's a lot that's been done, and I'm wondering why I didn't get that other pile over there done, right? So at least a way of thinking about how to do that. I think I also want us to leave here understanding, why are we here? I'm here because I'm very good friends with Danielle, and she talked about this event 3 years ago, and I couldn't come. So, but you may be here for other reasons. And I think that it's also important because in the framework in which we operate today, I constantly butt up against people with law degrees who have created policies that drive me crazy. It's important to understand how we think, because it is scary how many different places you encounter a lawyer or the law or the regulation. And it is created by people who don't spend enough time thinking through the systems that they're creating. We take for granted that the system works, right? And we all know that it's not working because we are where we are. So in order to see a huge shift, you need to get buy-in by people who may not naturally see what you see and hear what you hear and have the experiences that you experience. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to at least have an understanding of what someone who's had my trajectory might respond to some of the concepts we're talking about today. So in order to have an interactive session, which is what I'm hoping this will be, I just want to put together a couple of guidelines so we can all feel comfortable participating or not participating. So the first thing that I'm going to practice doing is trying it on. I'm going to be willing to try a different form of conference session, of interaction, of idea or concept or theory of seeing the way the world works. And I'm going to really take on something that I'm not familiar with, right? Step one. And for a lot of lawyers like myself, it's the concept of free liberalization of things that used to exist for centuries and allowing humans to make their own decisions about what they do and put in their bodies, right? Secondly, it's really important if we're going to have people share openly and honestly with one another to be able to foster stronger community relationships, that we do so confidentially today. I think it's very important that people feel like they have a space to express themselves without potential fallout or backlash. That does not mean that we will not consider other people's feelings or what the actual impact of your intended statement or action might be, but it does mean that we're not going to go out there tomorrow and run into somebody at the farmer's market and say, so-and-so said such and such on Saturday. Can you believe that? I think that when we do that, it makes it harder for people to learn. And it can make it harder for people to learn, and when you fear retribution, you cannot admit ignorance. And I try to admit my ignorance about a lot of things as often as possible. Finally, while it is very important that we participate in a workshop, you have the right to say, I pass. So there'll be a moment here to share some of your feedback and thoughts, but if you do not want to do so, if you feel uncomfortable sharing in front of the greater collective, that's perfectly fine. I'm not going to call on people. Law school does that. They cold call you and ask you what you think about a case when you've heard about things that happened to people in the 18th century, and it's very uncomfortable when you're trying to discuss human rights or the rights of women to be asked that in front of hundreds of classmates. So won't do that to you today. And then finally, there's a typo, but we're going to try to substitute but for and. So try it on, don't reject it, and include other possibilities and potentials. So I'd like to start by having people interact, because we haven't done this morning. Just introduce the person next to you and answer one of these questions. Why are you here? Here are a couple of ideas of why I'm here, but I'm going to walk around and just say hello and get to know who we are in this space. So let's take a couple minutes to say hi and shake it out. I promise you'll be able to continue the conversations in context as we continue today. So now that we have a better sense of who we are and why we came here today, we're going to get into the we're going to get into the inspiration for why I want you to interact with one another. So as I said, this is a talk, workshop, interaction around how we can set our goals and how we can collectively achieve them. So we heard a lot from other speakers about what their visions are of the future, how nature impacts our lives, how seeing people hold up and honor sustainable agriculture, urban agriculture, plant medicine, and new ways of being and practicing lives, or increased access to existing ways of being and practicing lives, has helped shape some of the different regions here in Oakland, in California, and elsewhere in the United States. So now, I think whether or not it's the goal of remembering your keys when you leave, or something bigger, it's important that we start to envision what it is. So to work through the rest of the workshop, I think you should take a couple minutes to write, draw, share. I don't assume that people can write, or you might have issues with holding the pens, but at least share with someone next to you verbally. What are some things you think should change to improve our collective reality? These are just ideas of goals you can think through. What do you want the world, Bay Area, California, or wherever you came from today to look like in 5 years? And lastly, if you waved your magic wand and could do anything with this collective of humans or the sub-collective that you introduced yourself to, what would it be? So these are just prompts. You can go off prompt and think to yourself, I have some other ideas and I have some other inspiration, but let's take a couple minutes to just think of our goals, jot them down, and maybe share them for a couple minutes with one another. And then we'll come back to the frameworks.
I had two main goals. One is to feel in more rhythm with each other and with the kind of greater life on Earth and Earth itself. I think the rhythm part is really important. And then the other goal, or things that I would change to improve our collective reality here, is kind of removing categories and kind of the way that we think and speak, removing categories and moving more towards a like a spectrum, and that's it.
Thank you for sharing.
I think a lot about people who have policy making, decision power. And if all of those, which is all of us really, because we all can be part of that process, but if all of those people were coming from a place of prioritizing care and accessibility, I think that would, ripple out into all of our policies and, just like that prioritization of care for each other.
Thank you, Elise. So there isn't a slide with my goals or inspiration prompts, but this ties into what Elise just shared with us about increased accessibility. I'll answer the second bullet. So for me, I grew up on the East Coast. I was born in DC and raised in Maryland. And one thing that happened as a child is that my mom learned to drive in her 30s when I was 5, because she had come to America, lived in New York, and had no need to learn how to drive until she married my father, had kids, and suddenly needed to get around. And that's as we were building some of the different metro lines to increase access. And you fast forward to 2001, I come out to California for college, and I'd grown up on the East Coast riding New Jersey Transit, Amtrak, MART, everything. And I get here and I think to myself, I'm going to go from Stanford to San Francisco. I was an art history major. I want to get up there and I want to see the museums. So barrier number one, Caltrain was under construction my entire freshman year. So that meant you'd have to ride a bus. Barrier number two, that bus takes at least 2 hours to go from Palo Alto to San Francisco. Barrier number three, it's a completely different transit system to go from Caltrain buses to San Francisco Muni. Barrier number three, if you don't know what a bus stop looks like in San Francisco, you're gonna get passed by several buses because it's painted on a pole. In a lot of other cities, we have shelters, we have seats. You're not standing in the cold for a long period of time with no sense of when the next bus is gonna come. There's an app, there's a number you can call, there's a map. So my freshman year, I go from East Coast, multi-forms of transit, riding Greyhounds and, using payphones when I got lost to call my mom, to the West Coast where I felt like I was on an island while still in a metropolitan area, and I was a student. So all I could think about is what people like my mother would do if they tried to move out here, who didn't want to drive on freeways or didn't have a car. We weren't allowed to have cars as freshmen. And then you realize that there's no free transfers, the systems don't all connect together, and for someone like me, who has multiple states who have to cooperate to maintain bridges and train systems in the DC area, it drove me crazy to know that different cities and counties just could not cooperate to make our area accessible and to eliminate the need for cars. So I was living with this daily contradiction, and I still live with it, between all of our progressive stated values here in the Bay Area and the complete environmental waste that exists because we have not solved for the simplest thing, which is access. I have anger issues, and one of the things that makes me so angry, irrationally angry, are these scooters. And it's because Because they are literally the dumbest thing I could think of to solve for access when you know that there are people who can't easily balance while walking on 2 feet, and you're telling me, scooter person, that this is a solution to access, when AC Transit during my lifetime living here in the East Bay went from free bus-to-bus transfer to each time you get on a bus, you pay. And when you add it all up, all you're doing is incentivizing people with time and cards like me to just ride in these rideshare services, which are clogging our streets in ways that we have not solved for. So when I think about what do I want the world, Bay Area, California, to look like in 5 years, it's pretty straightforward and simple. We will have a space to be. We will be able to get around easily and without having to pay to move ourselves. And we will have people not living on the streets but having housing. So that's my dream. So. I just realized I spent a lot of time thinking and not really talking about our actual implementation. So I'm going to speed through these, and you can do this work at home or during the breaks today to respect my other speakers. But now that we've got some dreams, we've got some goals, goals are only as achievable as the steps we take to try to implement them. And each step may be perfect or imperfect, but we need to have a framework of doing it. So I ran into this model for goal setting in, as I said, the context of my job, where we're trying to change agricultural practices one small farm at a time. And so in order for that goal to be achievable, it has to be smart, pure, and clear. So the theory is, in this blank space, you write your goal, and then you test it against these different rubrics. Is it specific? A broad goal cannot be measured against. Is it measurable? That's number 2. Is it attainable? Yes, we believe everything is attainable, right? We're trying to envision a different reality. Is it realistic? It's realistic if you, again, are shaping the reality to be what you want, right? Is it time-phased? We cannot do all things at all times, right? Multitasking only works for a small percentage of people. The rest of us, like I said, lose our keys, which I've done twice this month. Is it positively stated, right? So we're trying to improve something, not do away with something, right? A way of saying people are free from all forms of oppression is to just say people are free, right? That is inherent in that statement is the fact that we're not oppressed and we're able to freely move and feel as if we can be our whole true selves. Is it understood? If we aren't speaking the same general language, we might not understand each other. And that's where you run into intent and impact being divergent concepts, right? If we're not able to understand each other, how do we know if we're getting towards that goal? Is it relevant? Not everything has to change now, and it may not actually be relevant to the goal stated if you're trying to take that step. Is it ethical, right? Am I harming others? Am I harming myself? Am I taking advantage of others in trying to achieve this goal, right? Ethics are important. Is it challenging? Easy things are not real goals, those are just tasks, right? And so for some people, some tasks are really unattainable for them, right? Like depending on what type of day you're having, simple things to other people might be large goals to others. So it's not to say the magnitude isn't important, right? Is it legal? Now, the answer to that may be not yet, right? Not yet. But it's also important to know whether or not something is legal so that you know what you have to change, who you have to convince, and who you're going to run up against, because we have not done away with the law yet. Is it environmentally sound, right? The goal is to not take more than what we need and to not leave things worse off than when we found them. Is it agreed? Like, does it agree? Will people agree upon it with you? You need a number of people to collectively agree to a goal to achieve it on the large scale. And is it recorded? You got to write it down. So that's why I spent some time printing paper, because if you don't write it down, what is it? It's just a dream. It's not a goal. So the next page is just to check your goal. We're not going to do it right now because, as I said, we're running out of time. You may reject this framework entirely, but it is always good to see, does my goal fit within the framework? And if not, how do I break that goal down into multiple steps so that the collective set of metrics all add up to the big, hairy, audacious goal? Now, some of us have stated things that we want to do that involve greater policy change. And so this is one pyramid of approaches that that resonated with me recently in interacting with someone who's trying to change over health systems and increase community access to healthcare. So whether you agree or not, dentists feel it important that you brush your teeth, right? In some way. And let's say a lot of people dislike brushing their teeth. How do you get more people to brush their teeth, right? So you can have a policy that everyone who works in a specific space has to brush their teeth. Great, it's required. But just making something mandatory doesn't mean everybody's gonna do it. So how do you reward me for brushing my teeth? You know, when I was little, I was playing violin for DC Youth Orchestra, and I did not like to practice. And my mother was smart and realized that I was motivated by nail polish, Kit Kat bars, a couple other things. You know, stuff you can afford when you have 5 kids. So, because nail polish was $1 back then. And so she would have me like mark off every day, like that I'd practiced my violin, and once I had 5 stars, I could go get a Kit Kat bar, or I could pick out a new bottle of nail polish for my bitten fingernails. So you make it rewarding. You make it normative, right? So my brothers all had to practice whatever instrument they were playing, so it wasn't as if I felt singled out or that I was the only person who had to follow this practice. So it's all about creating communities that find it to be normal. Then the user interface, right? Not everything is gonna be easy at first, but the goal is to think about how to iterate each step to make it easy so more people can join in, right? Think about how you present the idea. And then finally, you have to build the infrastructure. So if there's no infrastructure to make it possible, you can't achieve the policy goal. So this is just one way of thinking through how you approach goals. So finally, you know, I don't know if other people have this challenge, but it's hard for me to prioritize when I serve 100 or so individual employees within an organization, plus a visionary CEO, plus a board of directors. And so at any given point in time, my task list changes, or I'm being faced with a lot of stimulus external to myself that completely shapes and shifts what I thought I was gonna do when I woke up that morning. And so in trying to achieve the bigger goal of client service to my greater company, to move the industry forward towards more sustainable agricultural practices, I found this quadrant to be very helpful. And for those of you who do not have the flyer, this is cut off, but you basically divide out the tasks for your goal into 4 quadrants, right? So if it is important and not that urgent, so that's the upper left, you set a date to do it. So it's not on your mind, it's not stressing you out, you're not waking up in the middle of the night worried about this thing you need to do to achieve a goal. Set a date and hold yourself to the date, right? If it's less important and less urgent, you can set it aside and see if you can exist without it, or you can pick it up once you've accomplished the other 3 quadrants. Upper right-hand corner is something that is important and urgent. You do it now, you do it yourself, and you do it as quickly as possible, right? Because until you get that out the way, you won't be able to move on to the goals that you set a date to do. And then finally, if it's urgent but less important, that's something you can let go of and try and have someone else collaborate with you on, right? So for some of us who feel as if we take on a lot, and I know I felt this personally when I was co-founding Supernova and we were working on different policy change, it was very hard for me to feel like I could have someone else assist with some task because it was seen as very important and very urgent to me, but I wasn't making this matrix, right? I was putting everything in that upper right-hand corner, and not all things can be urgent and important all at once. It's just not possible, unless you can juggle fire, which I can't yet. So here's where we start. I want you this weekend to think of your dreams, think of your goals, work through them, make sure that they are ethical, environmental, they're smart, pure, and clear, and then figure out where you start. And if you find that this helps you, share it with someone else. And I hope that you've learned something today. Thank you for your time.